Paul Epstein spent nearly 15 years as a pro sports executive, a global sports agency, and the NFL league office. He is also the best-selling author of the book, The Power of Playing Offense, and host of the podcast Playmakers on Purpose. He is a coveted keynote speaker.
Let me make mistakes on the administrative side of the business. When you make mistakes on the people side of the business, you are hurting lives. And I'm saying this with passion for a reason. I fundamentally believe that the way we treat people at work, it cascades out into people's lives.
No
so
doubt.
They will be better husbands, sons, daughters, community members, whatever it is. They'll be a better friend. They'll be a better contributor. They'll be a better impact driver in their life if they have a positive workplace versus they go home beat up. How do you think they're going to show up? We're not light switches. You can't just say, hey, Jason, I'm sorry you had a crummy day. Hey, flip the switch, man. Go be a good husband. That's not how life goes. And so what I'm getting at is I had to fall on the sword saying, what does a people first playbook look like?
Yeah.
And what does it feel like? And tactically, how can I share this in ways that are portable to every single culture in the world?
Welcome back to The Thermostat with Jason Barger. If you're currently on a commute, a walk, or just a micro break in your day, glad you're making time to step back, to think, and to reflect on the next steps on your journey. I've never been more convinced the best leaders and team cultures in the world are the ones that make time to step back, breathe in good oxygen, and calibrate their thermostat. I hope today's conversation leaves you feeling grounded and inspired. Now let's dive into today's topic to engage our minds and hearts in order to authentically lead and create compelling cultures wherever we are in the world. Hey everyone, it's Jason and welcome back to the Thermostat Podcast. Wherever you are and however you're coming to the podcast today, welcome back. If you're one of the OGs that's been with us from the very beginning, we're well over 100 episodes now. So if you're one of those folks, so glad you're still with us on the journey. If you are new to the podcast, then welcome. So excited that it continues to grow and spread and get great reviews on that front. If you will do the great pleasure of hitting 5 stars, rating it, leaving a nice review on whatever platform you're using, share it, amplify it, spread it to other people in your network. That's the way that these things spread. So I appreciate anybody that takes the time to do that. That's really, really helpful. And I appreciate it. I am very excited to invite my guest for today into the chat in just a minute. Paul Epstein spent nearly 15 years as a pro sports executive for multiple NFL and NBA teams, a global sports agency, and the NFL league office. He is also the best-selling author of the book, The Power of Playing Offense, and host of the podcast Playmakers on Purpose. He is a coveted keynote speaker and is on a mission to inspire leaders and lives to meet the unique challenges of our era. Whenever somebody in my network says, hey, the two of you ought to just know each other, I just say yes. And I don't ask questions. I say, if somebody feels that way, that's how Paul and I connected. And so I'm excited to have Paul onto the podcast today. Paul, welcome on.
Thanks so much, Jason. Fired up to be here.
Yeah, man. It's every conversation that we've had to date, I have appreciated your spirit, and certainly we've been aligned in so many of our messages. So I'm always excited to have people on the pod that we can just talk about this stuff that I geek out about and that I think is really cool and super important about developing authentic leadership in the world today, and certainly creating compelling cultures. And the fact that I'm more convinced of this than ever, that teams and organizations, especially in the environment that we're still in, but we've been coming out of over the last 2 years, that organizations and teams and companies that are clear on what is the culture that we are proactively trying to shape together are the ones that are navigating their way through this more effectively. And so we got to know, what is that culture? And then how do we lead that culture? And how do we kind of give life to that culture? So I know you and I have a lot of similarities that way. So I'm excited to have you on today. So let's start with the pro sports executive. That always is interesting to people, I'm guessing, is, you've had a lot of experience. Sorry about your Niners, by the way.
I know, 49ers. I know. There's still a little salt, but it's okay. Hey, we went further than expected. If you would have told me a few months before the season ended that we would have made the NFC Championship game, I would have said, That is awesome. And so here we are. I'll pretend that we didn't lose. I'll pretend that we can go to yesteryear. But either way, look, I'm fired up to talk sports, fired up about my Niners next year. So let's go.
Awesome. Love it. Well, hey, just for the listeners, tell them a little bit of, quick version of your pro sports executive years and maybe how that shaped you and kind of led you to where you are today and what you're doing now.
Yeah, absolutely. So overall, it was about 15 years, the last handful of which were with the Niners. So we'll get there, but that is why I'm so passionate about the organization. By far best culture that I ever worked in the sports industry. Literally, people first was not a bumper sticker. It was a way of life. It was definitely something that I felt, and I felt compelled to just be a lifelong ambassador of the organization. And it doesn't hurt, by the way, that my wife and I got married on the 50-yard line of Levi's Stadium. Nice. It was her idea, I swear. And if somebody listening in says, Paul, that's BS, dude. Literally, like, how'd you just drag her out on the field? I'll say this. I found a bigger sports fan than me, which is hard to do, but I found one. Converted Raiders fan. So that's fun fact 2. And then fun fact 3 is, if you're listening to this, would you really want to get married at your office? Like, think about that. I know my office was a football stadium and it sounds amazing, but that was my office. Of course it wasn't my idea. Okay. So I digress. All right. Worked for 3 NBA teams out of the gates. And what that looked like, I was selling tickets for teams that had a ton of inventory. They say that you sell one of 2 things, hope or results. So in my 15 years, I sold a lot of hope. Okay. And so that's where I was. I started at the LA Clippers in 2005. That year, ESPN called us the worst brand in sports. The year after, Sports Illustrated said the Clippers are the worst franchise in sports history. So try selling that.
Yeah.
I was one of 12 people that comes into, as I almost thought of it, as a pledge class. And I was the only person that saw the second month on the job. That's how grueling the conditions were. But that was one of the first fires that I walked through. So kind of in the sports realm of Sports Center, they do 2 things really well. They don't show you the game. They show you the highlights and the lowlights. Yeah. And so for me, a low light was more of the challenge, the adversity, selling a lot of hope for teams that the marketplace was kind of apathetic about it. And my second stop was in New Orleans for the then Hornets, now Pelicans. And it's such a football region in the country. And so how do you get people to care about something that otherwise they just don't have a deeper burn for? And we were on the brink of losing the franchise, and through a very purpose-centered campaign called I'm In, the then now late commissioner David Stern said, sell this, which meant number 1 in season ticket sales, or we're going to have to permanently relocate the franchise because you're the least economically viable club in the league. And it just wasn't sustainable. I'm happy to say that we did it. We made it bigger than basketball. And that was one of the first times that I understood the power of purpose, bigger than personal purpose. This tapped into the identity of a marketplace, just like it could be the identity of a company. And now how do you rally people around that? Now, fast forward, I go to the Sacramento Kings. That was interesting. I was responsible for company culture during an NBA lockout. So how do you sustain culture when the labor doesn't exist? Literally, there's paper airplanes flying around. The players can't report in, and you're supposed to stay positive. You're supposed to have great morale. So that was another stop. And before I tell you about the New York story, because that's how I landed in the NFL league office, eventually got plugged into the Niners. But the important part, and this is a part of culture, this is part of leadership. And this advice is not new, but it's powerful, because there was the guy named Eddie that reported to me. He was on my team. As I say, he was in my span of care at the LA Clippers when I was the sales manager. And he and I go out to grab a bite. And I said, Eddie, I'm really dumbfounded right now. I look around our sales pit and I see tremendous talent. I know we have uber talent, but the results don't reflect it. Like, the scoreboard's not looking so hot. What's going on? And I trusted his perspective. He was a little older than me, had run his own business. So even though he reported me, I felt like I learned more from him, to be honest. And so fast forward in that conversation, Eddie says, hey, what are we doing right now? I said, well, we're just grabbing a bite. He said, is it fair to say we're breaking bread? I said, yes. And then he challenged me respectfully. And he said, when's the last time you broke bread with anybody on the team except for me? And that moment, that call out, literally, Jason, it woke me up. And I'll tell you this, I had that sales management position for 2 years. The first year, we were 28th in league revenue. The second year, with the same bad product on the court, we finished second in revenue, because that is when I understood. See, I was managed in a certain way, and I'm not knocking the people that brought me into the industry, but it was very much just kind of a little bit of a alpha militant. Like it was just like, you know, it's a high performance culture, a little bit of crack the whip, sink or swim type. And so I didn't know any different. I didn't. And so it's the whole golden rule versus platinum rule conversation, which I'm sure your audience is familiar with. And basically, until I realized the power of relationships, I took that with me to New Orleans. There were people I met in New Orleans. They asked me to come to Sacramento. They asked me to come to New York. I never had to interview for another job after I made that LA to New Orleans move. So I think that's a powerful thing for everyone to listen to. It's not new advice. Hey, build relationships with your team, with your leaders, to your left and right, in all directions. But for me, it literally created a magic carpet ride that ended with me at the Niners a decade after that aha moment.
No, I appreciate you sharing that, because not only does that talk about the trajectory of your career and some of the interesting places that you've been and things that you've been a part of, but right in the heart of that is, and oftentimes, and I know you know this, when we speak to sales groups, that oftentimes, you know, especially typical salesperson, you know, comes to the mindset of like, no, it's only about the results and I'm a grinder and I, you know, that kind of stuff. And yet when it gets unlocked, that it's truly about the relationship and about not just the sale, but the experience of the sale and the culture that's created between, like, all of a sudden the magic carpet ride that you just described, like, that's what's happening. And so I know for you, you know, as we've talked in the past, at the heart of that has been in your own journey, your own personal development, and then certainly the way that now you are helping other organizations, is in the heart of that is mission, you know, purpose of, wait, why are we doing this, and inspiring people to think that way. And so, you know, let's talk about your book for a second, The Power of Playing Offense, and tell us a little bit about that. What does that even mean? And then how does that, you know, why is that relevant to leaders and cultures, especially in the world that we're in right now? The power of playing offense.
100%. And in my opinion, it's always been a message that could be absorbed, and it could allow teams and leaders and people and cultures to thrive. But especially as we're still in this pandemic, some could say we're emerging from it. I would say I'm quadrupling down on my belief in why we should be playing offense. Before I explain the difference between offense and defense relative to business and leadership and culture, I'll say that this was the playbook that I never had. So remember a few minutes ago when I said, hey, this is how I was brought into the industry. And again, I'm not talking smack on anybody else. I'm just saying this was how I was led, or a better word is maybe how I was managed. And, you know, there's a chasm between what a manager is and what a leader is. And ultimately where I got to was, how can I write a playbook that would allow others, the leaders of today and tomorrow, to avoid some of the pitfalls that I had to go through? And I do agree that life experience, trust me, there's a lot of naysayers to what I just said, and they push back and they're like, dude, I wouldn't be where I am had I not made all the mistakes and failed and fallen on my face. And I get it. But my thing is, let me make mistakes with process. Let me make mistakes with systems. Let me make mistakes on the administrative side of the business. When you make mistakes on the people side of the business, you are hurting lives. And I'm saying this with passion for a reason. I fundamentally believe that the way we treat people at work, it cascades out into people's lives. No doubt. They will be better husbands, sons, daughters, community members, whatever it is. They'll be a better friend. They'll be a better contributor. They'll be a better impact driver in their life if they have a positive workplace, versus they go home beat up. How do you think they're going to show up? We're not light switches. You can't just say, hey, Jason, I'm sorry you had a crummy day. Hey, flip the switch, man. Go be a good husband. That's not how life goes. And you may be able to do it for a day, maybe for a week. You can't do that for a year. You can't do that for 5 years. And so what I'm getting at is I had to fall on the sword of essentially saying, what does a people first playbook look like?
Yeah.
And what does it feel like? And tactically, how can I share this in ways that are portable to every single culture in the world that believes, like I said earlier, people first is not a bumper sticker. It is a way of life. And so getting into the offense versus defense piece.
Well,
as
first of all, hold on. Before you go into that, let me just pause because I know my listeners are grinning right now of everything, the wonderful, emotional, passionate rant that you just went on. They're going to be grinning because they've heard me say that exact same thing. How the culture that we create for the people in our organizations, for the people on our teams, that permeates every element of their life. And so that, when we talk about setting a temperature, and
yes,
none of us are perfect. None of us are perfect. But as we get more and more clear on what is that temperature that I, Jason, am trying to set as a human being in the world, and yes, in my career, then with whatever I do professionally, but then ultimately that permeates how I show up as a father, as a husband, as a friend, as a community member, as a human being in the world. And so the culture that we create and the cultures that we help set the temperature for truly change the world. And so I'm just echoing that, and my listeners are shaking their heads like, yeah. Now I see why Jason and Paul have connected.
Many teams and organizations right now are realizing that they need to do both. They need to engage the minds and hearts of their people in person, where everyone in the room can experience the energy of congregating together and find clarity for the road ahead. And they also need to continue to find ways to engage the minds and hearts of their people virtually, with those who are working remotely or at a distance. So, if you are in the process of planning your next team meeting, company all-hands event, conference, or culture summit, and are looking for support with a powerful keynote speech, facilitated team conversations that are the currency for change, or deeper development on leadership mindset and an intentional strategy for the culture you're trying to create, I hope you'll contact us at jasonvbarger.com, jasonvbarger.com. It is my privilege and our honor to partner with great people to provide support in these areas. We want to breathe oxygen into your leaders and throughout your organization so you can set the temperature you want for your culture. We look forward to connecting with you soon.
Well, I love it. And look, a couple things to double click on, and then I'll get to offense, defense. One is, I think there's a misperception in the world that culture is solely this team-wide thing, an organizational thing.
Yeah,
I believe each person listening has a culture of self, because culture is how you show up. Culture is colored by your actions, your behaviors, your decisions. That starts at a personal level, and then it scales to create more of the locker room effect, as I call it. And that's where we could talk more team-wide. And then on the subject of temperature, everybody listening, when you walk in a room, you either warm it up or you cool it off. The question is, are you aware of your own temperature? That is the $1 million question. And that battle of self-awareness is how you can live with more ownership and authenticity and confidence and intention to say, I am going to positively impact every person I touch, every place, every room that I walk in, because I'm a temperature setter.
That's right.
I'm breathing oxygen into the room, right? I know these are messages that are core to you.
Yep.
All right. So offense, defense. I'll say this. If I want to take the shortcut answer, I would say offense are people that are aware of their temperature and they breathe oxygen, but I won't hit the easy button. I'll explain it in a little bit more of how I laid out in the book, which is I studied high performers, high achievers, people that I consider they're winning in the success game and the significance game, both. And I studied them both in the sports industry, on the playing surface, which I got to know countless players, of course, in the boardroom, in the business front office, and I emerged with a clear line in the sand. There are two groups of people, offense on one side, defense on the other. Offense is always on their toes, defense on their heels. So even in a situation like a pandemic, what I mean by toes, because people always think that offense means blind action. No, it means you're always moving. Sometimes it's the pivot left, pivot right. Sometimes the cliche, take one step back to take 10 forward. That step back is offense because you're being intentional and strategic about the vision and the direction you want to go. Then you get into a situation where you think about mindset. There's two mindsets. Am I playing to win or am I playing not to lose? So the person that plays not to lose, which of course is the defensive mindset, that is a person that will never fail spectacularly, but they will never win big because they just play small. And if you really are thriving with passion and purpose, there's going to be some leaps in there. There's going to be some big, massive swings of the bat. It's not even about whether you connect. It's, do you have conviction and belief that you should be swinging this bat? And why do you want to hit that ball as far as possible? And that is a mindset where you're playing to win. Like you said, Jason, we're not perfect. Nobody bats 1,000 in business or life, but are you trying to? And are you obsessed with being better tomorrow than you were today? That's offense. The last piece I'll share about offense versus defense and kick it back to you is you think about whether it's a pandemic or any other adversity that we're facing. Those are external circumstances. Or in business, you could think of market conditions like me. Oh, poor old me. I'm selling the underdog franchise. If I cared that much about not being able to control market circumstances, I would have floundered in my career because that's a defensive mindset. Literally, things I can't control, these external circumstances are dictating my terms. They're dictating my life, my energy, my attitude, my reactions, all of that over something I can't control. Versus with offense, we live on our terms. We take control of our future. We tap into saying, I know I can't control that, but I can positively influence it. And that is the mindset of playing offense. And so I created a 5-pillar system that essentially builds an arc of how each person, each team, each culture can apply an offensive framework into their lives.
Oh, I love it. I love it. Yeah. And you're right. It begins so much of what we do and the behavioral response that we have, again, back to the thermostat at the temperature that we set, begins in the mind and begins with what is that path of the mindset that we're going to go down? And is it on that, as in your terms, the defensive mindset, or is it that offensive mindset? And so much of also what I here in what you're saying too is that authenticity of like, what is it that we are authentically trying to create? What are we trying to accomplish here? And again, we're not going to bat 1,000, but what does forward progress look like? And that I can't control the things that are happening around me. I can't control the external environment, but I still, back to that individual mindset and choice is, well, what is the temperature that we're going to choose to set? I can't control all this, but what I can control is what is it that we're going to put forward. So let's talk a little bit, dive into a little bit of leadership and culture stuff within that, the power of playing offense. One of the phrases that you talk about is embody the gold jacket culture. Say a little bit more about what that means to you or anything related to that speaks to what we're talking about in terms of leadership and culture.
Yeah. So what you're talking about is the fourth of the 5 pillars, which is embody gold jacket culture. And in order to set it up, I'll share a quick bit on the third pillar, which I call salute the long snapper. A long snapper, for those, whether you're a sports fan or not, it's a position in football, hikes the ball to the punter, a largely overseen role. Yeah. But it is the person, metaphorically speaking now. Think of it like this. If you're listening and you've done something in your life 100 times, and perhaps 99 of those 100, you did it right and you never heard a word. But then you did that thing wrong one time and you never hear the end of it. That is the life of a long snapper. They hike the ball the way they're supposed to. They don't even feel seen, valued, or heard. They just did their job. But they screw up that one time, just like I have, you have, everybody has. Yep. And we just get railed on. Everybody listening has been that long snapper. And until people feel recognized, until we can shine a light on everyone in the locker room, long snappers included, that leads to gold jacket culture, because we're not always going to be the star quarterback in the room. And so until you have a team that feels that they genuinely belong, like they matter, like they have a seat at the table, that's when you have the opportunity to scale those individual powers into the gold jackets, which is the Hall of Fame worthy performance. The gold jacket is what NFL Hall of Famers get. So essentially, to get to pillar 4, long snappers included need to feel like they matter, they make a difference. And you as a leader and as a culture champion need to constantly remind them and value them and let them know how critical they are to the team. So with gold jacket culture, the really interesting part here, Jason, is, I think of culture, whether in sports or in business, and they're largely similar. And we always use this buzzword of transformation. How do you transform a culture? Half of the things you do, Jason, I bet you have something to do that, like the outcome, if I hire you, is I want my culture to positively transform.
No doubt.
And you have, of course, your systems and your methods and your message and all this stuff, as do I. And I'll be a little vulnerable here. I used to do culture transformation all wrong, because I now realize there's 3 characters in the room. I call them partners, tourists, and prisoners. And if the partners are fully engaged, front row, they're leaning in, they're responsible, like they are even if they don't agree with you, they still have this positive energy of keeping the team and organization moving forward. That's a partner. A tourist is somewhere in the middle of, some go left, some go right. They're going to check it out. They're remotely engaged. It's kind of a mood or attitude thing. They just fall in between. And then a prisoner, arms are folded. 5:30, can't get here soon enough. I was voluntold to be here. Just that. Everybody knows, a partner, a tourist, a prisoner. So where I got it wrong, Jason, is I used to think that in order to transform a culture, you had to change the prisoners. And I focused most of my energy on the prisoners. Mm-hmm. And 2 things that I learned from that. One is it doesn't work. People only change if they want to change. You cannot force somebody to change. That's fact 1. And then the second fact was I was so drained by the process of trying to change a prisoner and typically failing at it. And now I didn't have any energy left for the partners or the tourists.
Yep.
And so when I had those 2 ahas, I now flipped it and said, what would happen if I almost exclusively focused on the partners and I shined a light? And it was from recognition programs to just making the experience at work and even beyond work, making them feel like they were the most important person in the world to me in that moment. I was always present with them. I had the empathetic listening, like all those things that show care and compassion. And when we started to really double down on those partners, it's tremendous because the A's turned into A pluses.
Yep.
B, there was this magnetic pull of tourists that joined them, the ones that believed in what we were trying to do and build and accomplish. And sure, a couple of prisoners take that massive leap. The majority no longer believe in being there and they make their own decision. You don't need to have those hard conversations. But it was so rough when I put all of my energy into the prisoners. And then I just started focusing on the partners. And that's when things started to truly transform for the long haul.
Yeah. And the temperature spread. And that's the putting the focus on the people that are already an alignment of wanting to set that temperature and bringing others along. And it's amazing how when more and more people together, individual thermostats begin to set an aligned temperature with the people around them. It's amazing how many people then rise their level to that place. And you're right. Some people, it just reveals that it's not the right place for them or they're not willing. And so I love it. I love it. I also want you to, because in our very first conversation, whether you remember this or not, you stopped me and you said, you know what the definition of inspire is? And you started going into that. Give us a little bit about what it means to inspire. And then I know why you told it to me, but then I'll follow up with it. Say more about inspire.
Absolutely. So while I do love the English definition, I am more inspired by the Latin definition, which is to breathe life into. So when I'm in front of a group, I'm always trying to get them to tap into what breathes life into you. What inspires you? Is there a word? And we go through an exercise. And so if you're listening, what would that word be for you? And for me, it would be impact. And impact is because from my late father and hearing stories from his former students in underprivileged communities and them telling me stories about how my dad was the first person that ever believed in them, or he gave them a reason to think that tomorrow was worth it. When you hear things like that about your hero, your role model, your icon, in my case, my dad, that's leadership. He may have chosen a classroom, I chose a boardroom, but that impact that years after he's physically been with us, to have people come up to me in places like a barber shop and share things with me, how would I not fall on the sword for impact? So impact breathes life into me. And you right now listening, Jason, yourself as well, we all have a word or a thought or an idea that breathes life into us. And so that is the Latin definition of inspire.
So I love it. And you reminded me of that because in our first conversation, we were talking about my next book that's coming out that's called Breathing Oxygen. And you reminded me of that to inspire is to breathe life into something. And really that part of the book, before you even knew what the concept was, is about breathing oxygen into ourselves, which gives us energy. But then also, what does it mean to breathe oxygen into others? And what are the mindsets that positive leadership and that kind of forward progress leadership that we were referencing earlier, what does that do to breathe life into cultures? And so that word inspire stuck with me ever since our first conversation together. I know, gosh, we're already getting to the point we're almost at our time. So I want to leave some time just to I know, one, if you want to say anything, I know you've got another book that's in the works. I don't know if you want to mention it or say anything about that, but I know you're creating, which is awesome. And also want you to be able to say anything about the Why Institute, if there's anything that you want to say about that.
Well, interestingly, they're connected. So while my first book was more that leader's playbook for personal and team transformation in the power of playing offense, the first pillar of that journey is to live with championship purpose. And so for me, finding my why fundamentally changed my life. It was an executive offsite retreat at the 49ers. My life truly has never been the same ever since. And so from having that, what started as a North Star, but then making it more of a 365 lifestyle and really tapping into my core values and starting to guide my actions, behaviors, decisions through those values, that really powered me to say, how can we democratize purpose? Purpose is the greatest gift that I ever received. And I'm on a mission to just pay that forward. And I know this is going to sound crazy. I want to scale this to reach 1 billion lives. And that's not going to happen just through Paul. That's going to happen through partnerships. That's going to happen through, like we talked about, that work experience that you create for somebody, they take that home with them. So you're technically influencing way more than just the people in your headquarters or your office. Those are people in a community. Those are citizens. And so in a very similar way, I'm on a mission to say, if right now purpose and the feeling of knowing your why is the minority of the world, how can we transform that into the majority? And so my second book is going to be about aligning our head, heart, and hands and having a 365 lifestyle on purpose. And with that, I do have a gift for each and every one of your listeners that taps into both the why and the purpose. So I've already covered the investment. So this is something that is free for everybody listening in right now. There is a 5-minute why discovery assessment that will literally give you not only your why, but then it gives you these amazing resources on how you can apply it to business, to life, as a parent, the greatest opportunities with your why, the challenges of your why, but the solutions to those challenges. It is a very robust thing that will come back to you. And so the way you get there, the URL is whyinstitute.com/purpose. So whyinstitute.com/purpose. Go there. We can put it in the show notes as well, I'm sure, Jason, and we'll just make it super user-friendly and easy, but literally 5 minutes and you can know your why and you can have all these amazing resources on how you can transform that into a 365 lifestyle.
No, that's awesome, dude. I appreciate you doing that. And we'll make sure to put that in the show notes, whyinstitute.com/purpose. And, if you're interested, go check it out. Free resource, which I appreciate, Paul, for you to throwing that out to anybody and connecting to what you're doing. Buddy, I could do this for hours on end, but also trying to make sure somebody listening to this on a walk or a commute or wherever you are, that this is a nice digestible thing. So I so appreciate you jumping on the pod, and appreciate more than anything the spirit with which the work you're doing, and the fact that we have connected is awesome, and that our spirit is aligned that way is so cool. And so I can't wait. We'll continue the conversation, I know, moving forward, but thanks again for jumping on and being on the pod today.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me on.
Awesome. Well, as we wrap up today's podcast, and again, thanks to Paul, check out the show notes so you see all that. I'll just remind us of this, that the future of leadership, the future of work, the future cultures that we're going to create together, all of those come back to clarity. What is that? What is the temperature that we want to set? And are we clear, and are we going to tie it to those actions and behaviors and decisions that you just heard Paul talking about? And so making the decision to say, let's not only know what the temperature is, but let's set the temperature together, and let's be strategic and intentional about setting that temperature together. So I'm, of course, more convinced of this than ever, that it's about connections that are going to bring us together rather than divide us. It's about authentic leadership and caring for people that's going to lead us forward. And so calibrating our thermostat to stimulate progress requires courage. It's going to require that deep breath and breathing life into ourselves so that we can breathe life into others, the good oxygen, and then to take that next step. And all teams and cultures need leaders who are intentionally seeking solutions together. So all of us play a role in setting that temperature. So thanks to everybody for listening to today's show. Again, I hope you'll rate, review, amplify, share all those things to help spread this even further. And stay connected at Jason V. Barger on social media. And wherever you are, have a wonderful day, and breathe life into yourself and to the people around you. Thanks again, Paul. Thank you for listening to today's podcast, and I hope the messages and questions stimulate positive change along your path. As always, if these messages resonate with you and add value to your life, I hope you'll help amplify them throughout the world. Please rate, comment, and share on whatever podcast or social media platform you're using, and share this podcast with the people in your life or work who should be part of these conversations. That way, this spirit does, in fact, spread. If these messages or developing leaders and culture would be helpful to you and your organization, please contact us at jasonvbarger.com, jasonvbarger.com. And remember, we are all ambassadors for the culture we want to create in our life and work. We have to own the vision we want to be a part of. The future of leadership is you, is me, is us. Be a thermostat.